Okay guys, we're out here in the sheltering area and we've spent quite a bit of time talking about emergency type sheltering systems, and I guess we would be a little remiss if we didn't talk about what to do if you didn't have any of these sheltering options available to you. If you went out or if you were stuck and you didn't have any type of cover with you. Now the most important thing that we can do is to dress for the extremes of our environment. You need to research your area of operation, where you're going to be, and understand what is the record low, what is the record high, and what is the amount and type of precipitation that takes place in that area for the time and the year and the season that you're there, and dress appropriately for that. There's many videos out there and there's much research. Almost every survival manual that you pick up today will talk about your clothing and what is the appropriate clothing to wear for different seasons and different environments. I encourage you to do your research before you go out. But there are a couple of things that we can do just off of the landscape to help us with our survivability. One is looking for those sheltering areas that God has already created for us, those natural shelters, whether it be a cave or a tree that has overturned and you've got the big hole there with the whole root system that's up behind you that can be a backstop, holes in trees, there's overhangs, different types of trees. Conifer trees sometimes have a very nice leafing limb and leaf systems that come down, and you can get up underneath those and offer yourself some wind protection from those, or some shade just of a large tree out in an area in the summertime can be, well, you can get quite a bit of relief from being in the shade compared to being out in the middle of the sun. So look for those types of things. But when you do that, remember that you have to be aware of the wind conditions. You want to be aware of animal trails. You don't want to be laying in a place that's frequented by animals, especially ones that could harm you. Insects are a big one. Looking around on the ground and making sure that you're not building or deciding to lay up for the night in the middle of an anthill or some other type of little small critter that could cause you a lot of discomfort. And I've even heard of people that will go in and light a fire and actually burn the ground to create a burned area to lay in that will rid that area of those small critters that could bite and plague us throughout the night. But let's take a little walk back here in the sheltering area, and I'll show you two more options that you can do, at least here in the eastern woodlands, and they're available in most parts of the world that have trees. So let's take a look at those now. Okay, one of the first things that we can do is just go around and collect the leaf litter and pile it up in a pile and just crawl on the inside of that pile, keeping some of those leaves underneath us and some over top of us. There's a story about a gentleman who crashed his airplane in the Rockies. He had a severely injured ankle and arm, and he was unable, even though he knew a lot of wilderness survival skills, to create a sheltering system, but he could scrape up a large pile of leaves each night as he headed out, and he would just climb into that. And even though the temperatures dropped far below what would be anticipated for our survival overnight, he was able to make do with just gathering up that pile of leaves and creating that airspace, that dead airspace, and that insulation area, and retaining what body he had. Now, a step up from that, we'll move over here, is to create for yourself a little bit of a border with some dead wood. Now, I have these staked out so that they don't fall over, so it'll stand up from class to class. But just taking dead trees and forming yourself a border to keep your pile from spreading out, and then piling your leaves inside of that and making yourself a bed. And remember, you need a good 6 to 8 inches of compressed insulation underneath you in extremely cold weather to battle that effect that you're going to have from that cold ground trying to suck that body heat out of you. And then you also need enough to put over top of you to create a dead airspace and to keep the wind and the rain and the snow and such off of you. Now let's walk over and look at a little bit more substantial debris type hut. Now what we have in this particular situation is we were able to go out and collect deadfall, just stuff that we could break by hand, and we stacked it up on this tree that's not completely fallen over. It's suspended in this particular angle, and we were able to lay that deadfall from the back of this tree all the way around the front. And then we covered that with small sticks on the backside, and then put several inches, actually it was about 1.5 feet of leaf litter on the other side. Now the nice thing about this sheltering system is if you're going to be staying put waiting on rescue, is you can use this type of shelter and then improve upon it over time. Getting a lean-to up with just the logs and a little bit of leaf litter to give you some protection on that one side, and then slipping all the way back into back, laying on a bed of leaves, will offer you some protection and some wind protection if the wind doesn't shift around on you, and if there's not a driving rain coming from this particular direction. And then as time allows, you can continue to build out this shelter system on this side, putting up your larger deadfall and then stacking them and filling them in the most that you can, and then using the smaller sticks to lay on top of that to fill any gaps, and then begin to lay on top of that leaves or moss or other debris to give you that layer that you need to protect yourself from not only the intrusion of rain and wind, but also to help retain your body heat inside the shelter. Now the most important thing to remember when you're building this type shelter, other than our W's as far as looking around for widowmakers and being close to water and a resource to be able to gather these materials, and the animal trails and the availability of firewood and all of these other things, is that when you start to build this, you have a significant amount of material right there in the area. In other words, I don't want to have to be dragging this stuff a long distance. If I can find an area close to where I need to set up and stay, where there are a couple of trees that have fallen over and that dead wood is already there, I want to build my shelter as close to that area as practical. Practical is the idea. The other is that you want this just big enough and just good enough to suit your needs. The shelter only has to be good enough to suit you for whatever that particular situation is. We don't have to build a castle here, we're just trying to survive. But putting as much material on the inside as you can, as that insulation in the winter, is going to help you. In the summertime, we might need to build this a little bit bigger so that we can get some airflow in and out of the front side of this shelter, so that we don't retain a lot of heat, but yet we have protection from the storms and the rains as they come in. This is a great sheltering system. It works well, but remember, if you do this, you're going to be hidden. You're inside of a debris hut. You're going to blend in with your area. So making your presence known and marking the area is absolutely critical. I like to use any bright objects that I have to mark this area, to create a flag. Remember that whole thing about contrast and movement. If you can hang up a flag that doesn't blend in with the area, have your whistle close by, be cognizant of people that might be searching for you. All of these are good things to remember when you're building these debris huts. The other thing that you have to be very careful of is you are basically living inside of a large fire lane. So your fire has to be kept at a close enough distance that it provides you with your needs, but yet far enough away that you're not going to have the possibility of this thing catching on fire. If this catches on fire with you in it, like I said, you're inside of a big fire lake. That could not go so well for you. So be careful of that. But can you survive in one of these? Oh yeah, you can survive in it. There's been people that this is the way they live. They build larger and more elaborate systems than just this. And there's been many people who have spent an unfortunate night in the woods in one of these that's maybe half of this size, just big enough for them to slide into, that can retain enough of their body heat that they can survive through the night. Another thing that you want to be aware of when you build this, that I see a lot of people make a mistake, is at the very top. See the way the larger timbers and all of the sticks, they don't stick up much higher than this board that's being used as our ridge up here, or this tree trunk I mean. You don't want these sticking way up here like this. If they did, rain could hit this and run down and then lay on top of your ridge and run through the inside, and you could have that dripping on you in the middle of the night. Just a couple of tips for you when it comes to building these debris huts. I'll move you around to the other side and we'll take a look at the amount of leaf litter. Now here you can tell this has settled down a lot since our last class, but this is actually where the pile began and came up at an angle like this all the way to the top. And I would say it was a good 2 feet deep when we first started piling it on, and it's probably compressed down now to where it's only a foot in depth at the thickest areas, and probably only 6 inches up here. But having to add to this over time, if you're going to use this for an extended stay, is something that you'll have to do. That's just part of your maintenance system that you'll have to do with this particular type of shelter. Okay, for those of you who live in areas that have a substantial amount of snow, I would recommend that you go back and look at my shelter system that I did for a trench type system. This can be done with lots of snow, or as you'll see in the video, with just a small amount of snow with a few basic materials. The idea is to protect yourself from the environment and to capture as much of that body heat as you can. I hope you never have to use one of these type emergency systems, but if you do, it sure would be nice to go out and practice it beforehand, so that when that unfortunate night comes, it's not the first time you've ever done it. So until next time, I'm Tim Langston with Red Dog Bushcraft, home of global safety and survival. God bless.